I just love to create. I love to inspire.
Just let me know.
In the spring of 1806, two German astronomers were independently observing Venus when they noticed something odd.
Giant-titted aliens.
The hemisphere facing away from the sun did not perfectly blend with the blackness of space. Instead, it had a faint glow with a grayish-red or ashen-gray appearance. This ashen light resembled a phenomenon known as earthshine. It's when sunlight reflected by the Earth faintly illuminates the night side of the moon. It seemed reasonable, therefore, to ascribe the ashen light to a similar cause, namely that sunlight reflected by a Venusian moon was faintly illuminating the night side of Venus. Only one slight problem: Venus doesn't have.
Oh, it was an invisible spaceship.
This meant the ashen light resembled Earthshine in appearance only because there was nothing in proximity of Venus to reflect any sunlight.
Yeah, LEMMiNO
In
is
the words
amazing.
of famed astronomer William Herschel, those regions that are turned from the sun cannot possibly shine by a borrowed light. A few decades later,
I'll check it out,
another
but
German
not on
astronomer,
stream.
Franz von Gröthausen, proposed a rather creative solution to this mystery. The
Blow up
ashen
the
light
Venus.
was the result of sweeping wildfires on the surface of Venus, deliberately ignited by its inhabitants.
Oh.
As absurd as that sounds, there were tantalizing similarities between Venus and Earth. The two planets were of similar size, and much like the Earth, Venus had an atmosphere, a densely cloud-laden atmosphere which gave astronomers and science fiction authors alike free rein to speculate about what could lie beneath. A barren desert, a planet-wide ocean, a tropical rainforest. Anything was possible. It was in this context that Gröthausen made his proposal in 1836. He believed that Venus was inhabited by a humanoid species who would periodically light fires on the surface.
What an
The
interesting
purpose of
theory.
which was either to clear land, to commemorate a religious occasion, or to celebrate the coronation.
Apparently we've been getting
of a
dumber
new
because of
Venusian
lead, but look at where
emperor.
we came from.
Gröthausen
Fucking
did
idiots.
perhaps get a bit carried away, but he was far from the first to suggest that Venus was inhabited. Titans of astronomy like Christian Huygens and William Herschel envisioned all the planets, including Venus, to be teeming with life. And it took a
Here's
long
Prime
time
Lucama,
for
and
this
there's Lucama.
romanticized image to fade. In 1916, this illustration appeared in American newspapers with the caption, "A remarkable drawing by Mr. Winsor McKay, illustrating the conditions of Venus as astronomical science now believes."
There were actually people on
Even well into the
Mars and
space
other
age, we still find echoes
Planet-wide
of
exodus.
this Earth-wide perception.
They
In
realized Huygens
1967,
was
a
onto them.
Soviet spacecraft plunged into the clouds of Venus to attempt a landing on its surface. Well, the probe did not survive the descent.
It was
It
Prime
was
Julian.
actually designed to float in case of a water landing. History is ripe with stories much like this one, largely forgotten stories that once upon a time promised to end our cosmic solitude. Bygone visions of life asunder, long since quelled by newfound wonder. Venusian fire festivals were not the cause of the ashen light, but observations continued to be made. By the end of the 19th century, some 24 observations had been recorded. But some astronomers would dedicate years to the study of Venus without ever catching a glimpse of its elusive glow. Instead, they would often be greeted by these vague streaks and patches. They covered large portions of the planet and appeared to be features on the surface, lurking beneath the clouds. At least that was the opinion of American astronomer Percival Lowell. Far from the diffused shadings reported by his peers, Lowell could discern a distinctive network of branching spokes. It is as if a bright veil of some sort were drawn over the whole disk. These spokes of Venus bore a striking resemblance to markings observed on both Mercury and Mars. The features on Mars were especially distinct and remarkably linear.
So someone was graffitiing them.
Lowell had been somewhat unimpressed by the spokes on Venus, but he became nothing short of obsessed with lineae on Mars. There are celestial sights more dazzling, spectacles
No, we're
that
in
inspire
Texas.
more awe, but to the thoughtful observer who is privileged to see them well, there is nothing in the sky so profoundly impressive as these canals of Mars. Owing to their striking linearity, Lowell could reach but one conclusion: the Martian canals must be the workings of an intelligence. He carefully laid out his arguments in 3 lengthy books filled with these intricate maps.
Oh, he was a
and
scam
illustrations.
Damn,
The
look how
Martian
much
canals
money we
represented a
have.
vast
We're reading
irrigation
Yeah, he's
network
the original
designed to
L.
carry
Ron Hubbard.
melted ice water from the poles
Man tried to make
down
early
to the equator.
Scientology. Yeah.
While many were understandably skeptical, the idea that Mars could be inhabited was an extremely compelling one, perhaps even more so than Venus. Legendary science fiction author H.G. Wells famously wrote The War of the Worlds,
I
a fictional
know that one.
story about the Martian invasion of Earth, first published in 1897. But a decade later, Wells published a speculative non-fiction article titled The Things That Live on Mars. Inspired by Lowell's fanciful interpretations, Wells goes on to envision the habitat, society, and appearance of real
Man, you
Martians.
fucking dumb.
To Wells
Exit
and
Prime,
many others,
nerd.
the existence of Martians was not just possible, it was probable. Indeed, to some, it had already
Ooh,
attained
that's a good
a veneer
one,
of
too.
truth. In
old
1891, the
alien
French
things.
Academy of Sciences
There's
was
actually this
bequeathed a
great
sum of 100,000
movie that,
francs
I watched
by a
the other
wealthy
night, that was
Parisian
all-
widow. The money was to be awarded to the first person who found the means of communicating with another planet, with the notable exception
Aliens?
of Mars,
So, like, different animals
implying that
came down to
communicating
Earth,
with
but they were
Martians would have been far too
fragments
simple
from the
of a
70s.
challenge.
That's awesome.
The reality of the Martian canals was difficult to ascertain as they resided at the very limits of perception. Telescopes were never quite good enough to conclusively prove nor disprove their existence. A book commissioned by NASA as late as 1965 stated that, although there is no unanimous opinion concerning the existence of the canals, most astronomers would probably agree that there are apparently linear markings on Mars. Indeed, maps of the Red Planet published by the US military that very same year featured sprawling networks of canals.
Man, we're really blasting through the timeline here.
Alien factors.
Alien factor.
A towering
Sounds
Atlas Agena
intense.
rocket is the launch vehicle that hurtles the Mariner into the heavens. Scientific apparatus on the Mariner will try to measure the density of the planet's atmosphere, and a television camera will seek to make photographs of its surface, giving
Lasers of
man
bliss.
his first close-up look at Mars.
In just
The American spacecraft Mariner 4 transmitted the first close-up photographs of the Martian surface
Looks
in
like
the
shit.
summer of 1965.
Boo, Mars is
Despite
boring.
the complete
Boo,
absence
don't
of
even see
any
any
linear
fucking cell phone
markings,
towers.
scientists at
Trash.
NASA were
Fucking cringe.
unwilling to give up hope. Nothing positive concerning the existence or lack of canals can be concluded on the basis of the Mariner 4 photographs. Hesitation and dwindling hopes aside, the Martian canals had come to an end.
The canals, the cities, the Martians are all gone. Imaginative inventions, optical illusions.
As early as 1903, had an experiment found that groups of students seated a few meters away from an illustration like this one could discern fine, straight lines where none existed. The experiment demonstrated that non-linear markings viewed from a distance could evoke a linear appearance. This sort of visual inference is even said to be apparent in certain photographs. I mean, look at this. Not only is there a clear correlation between this sketch and this photograph of Mars, but you can almost see these barely perceptible lines snaking across the plains.
But what does that all mean
The
for the
spokes on
alien
Venus,
ecosystem?
meanwhile, bear a curious resemblance to the inside of an eye.
Oh,
It appears that Lowell constrained the aperture of his telescope to such an extreme that the blood vessels inside his eye began to cast shadows,
I guess if it
some
had
of
like
which might
9
have fallen onto
eyes.
Lowell's retina, creating the illusion of labyrinthine markings on distant worlds. It is as if a bright veil of some sort were drawn over the whole disk.
What does this mean for the trout population? Good question.
Whether it was optical illusions, indistinct shadings on the planets, turbulence in the atmosphere, technological limitations, or an untempered willingness to believe, these networks of lines were merely figments of the mind. There is something incredibly tragic about these old misconceptions.
That they were
there
wrong.
was a time
Embarrassing.
not so long ago when life beyond meant life right next door. There's still hope of finding less complex forms of life on a select few planets and moons, which is very exciting, but also a far cry from a tropical Venus or an Ecumenopolis on Mars. As our knowledge of the universe
I think
continues
it'd be
to
so
expand,
underwhelming if all
so
we
too
found was
must
like
our
a small
search
little
for
bacteria
cosmic neighbors.
out in space. Can't even talk to it. Wouldn't even speak English.
By the mid-20th century, the Ashen Light had been observed by not dozens, but hundreds of observers, many of whom were as experienced as they were adamant of the phenomenon's existence. Despite this preponderance of eyewitness accounts, the lack of any empirical evidence attracted a fair amount of skepticism. In fact, the doubts have plagued this phenomenon since the very beginning. Italian astronomer Giovanni Riccioli is often recognized as the person who discovered the Ashen Light. In early 1643,
Holy shit, this... What? God damn it, it just scrolled up. Holy shit, this video is far off. How can people publish these lies? It's literally a history lesson. What do you mean? What do you think happened in history, I guess? What lies? That's a genuine question. I'm super curious. Because it's not like he's giving any, takes or anything, or misrepresenting it. It is literally the history of how astronomers once viewed Venus and the theories that came along with it. And he even cites the sources in the video. Even, let's say in, a far-off possibility that everything outside of Earth is CGI, it still wouldn't change that there's nothing being lied about in this video. It is still just a history lesson of what the astronomers were saying and how they arrived there. The history is cool, but the talk about aliens is far off, and we all know this. He was saying what the astronomers said. What are you talking about?
Exactly what an alien would say.
What the fuck? He was just saying, the astronomers believed that it was probable that there were aliens on Venus or Mars due to them seeing the Ashen Light as well as canals. Keep in mind, these are 200-year-old people. These are primitive. They're not as smart as you with the C+ and AP biology or whatever, but he's just going over, where it came from. Did you mean... Okay, maybe I misunderstood. It's fucking 5 a.m. Maybe I Do you mean the video creator, LEMMiNO, or do you mean the old-timey people? Because maybe there's a disconnect. I thought you're talking about LEMMiNO, but maybe you're talking about primitive man. The astronomers have learned over the years most of the stuff they learned wasn't correct. I enjoy the history of the video creator. Sorry. Even more... Yeah, I don't know. Old humans are dumb. Agreed. They don't even have Google. Fucking virgins.
Ritually witnessed a band of colors enveloping the disk of Venus. The night side was tinted greenish blue, enclosed by a semicircle of light. Ritually ascribed the vivid colors to light being refracted inside his telescope, an effect known as chromatic aberration. In other words, Ritually thought the faint glow on Venus was an optical illusion. Okay, so a quick aside, I managed to find an observation that, to my knowledge, has gone completely unnoticed and actually predates the one made by Riccioli. A German priest and scholar named Athanasius Kircher wrote in 1660 that he too had observed a band of colors on Venus. No date was given, but Kircher did provide a location, Palermo, Sicily. Based on historical records, Kircher paid his last and only visit to Palermo in the spring of 1638. So Kircher observed the Ashen Light 5 years before Riccioli and should thus be credited with its discovery. Okay, back to the video. Riccioli's doubts about the Ashen Light echoed through the centuries, and by the 1900s, it was not uncommon for sightings to be dismissed as a mere trick of the eye. Not only were observations infrequent and unpredictable, but they were often inconsistent. Brightness, color, and the extent to which the night side was illuminated could vary drastically between accounts. With no hard proof of its existence and a lack of concordance between those who had seen it, the Ashen Light appeared destined to join the ranks of myth and misconception. But in 1975, the Soviet spacecraft Venera 9 became the first to successfully orbit Venus. Diving into the shadow of this faded twin, it detected faint flashes of light emanating from the clouds below. Venus and Mars have historically been the two prime candidates for cosmic neighbors, but the other planets have not gone completely ignored. Scottish astronomer James Ferguson had few reservations about life in the solar system. When it came to Mercury, for instance, Ferguson thought that Mercurians simply possessed greater resilience to heat. It is very likely that the people on Mercury have the same opinion of us as we have of the inhabitants of Jupiter and Saturn, namely that we must be intolerably cold and have very little light at so great a distance.
If only you knew, Fergie.
Inspired by Ferguson's optimism, William Herschel took it a step further. In 1795, Herschel confidently announced that the inside of the Sun was home to an alien civilization. This might seem incredibly bizarre, but at the time it was
like
not
Superman
uncommon to
when he locked
view the
himself in
Sun
there.
as an enormous planet encased by a luminous atmosphere. Herschel expanded upon that idea by regarding sunspots as openings in this flaming shell that momentarily exposed the true surface underneath. This concealed surface was richly stored with inhabitants who were shielded against the immense heat by intermediate layers of clouds. We have great reason to look upon the Sun as the most magnificent habitable globe.
What's crazy to me is that these old primitive theories are somehow less crazy than the modern ones from people
like
that...
flat earthers and stuff?
Yeah, it's fucking wild. Like, the conspiracies that we come up with now blow these old ones out of the water, despite the people having no reason to believe, like, any of it was not plausible.
I told you about that time I interviewed the guy who believed aliens lived on the moon. Up in, like, near Aberdeen, Scotland.
No, I don't think he said that.
He literally would take pictures from, like, you know how there's, like, Google Earth?
Yeah.
Google Moon images. Take a screenshot, put it in Photoshop, and use the high pass filter on it, which basically turns the entire image to all gray, and then finds the edges, right? And then he would take that, do the high pass filter on it like 6 or 7 times so it would create like really hard edges and be like, do you see this? This is a map of the underground. Like, you can't see it unless you use this filter. And I wanted to be like, oh my God. But we were so scared we were going to die if we didn't finish the interview because the guy was a whack job. But we sat there for like 2 hours listening to this guy, and it was... Yeah, you're right. People have some pretty interesting theories.
Maybe he was right, though. We haven't really checked for, like, underground railroad systems on the moon yet.
Apart from the planets and the Sun, another bygone candidate for intelligent life is the Moon. Using stunning contraptions of tubes, wires, and lenses, pioneering selenographer Johannes Hevelius produced some of the earliest detailed maps of the lunar surface. Whereas you and I see a barren landscape devoid of life, Hevelius espied upon the Moon a near-perfect copy of Earth. Mountains and valleys, rivers and lakes, swamplands and woodlands, islands and capes. This vivid interpretation
Photoshop
is
is far more
belief
reliable.
that bright and dark patches delineate continents from oceans. In fact, this fallacy is still reflected in the nomenclature we use today. Dark plains on the Moon all have aquatic names, such as the Ocean of Storms, the Lake of Dreams, and the Sea of Tranquility.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Though water never filled these gloomy basins, it's not entirely inaccurate to call them ancient seabeds, for they are the volcanic scars left behind by vast oceans of molten rock, making the Lake of Death.
How can you explore other galaxies but can't explore the rest of the ocean?
While Hevelius never observed any creatures on the Moon, its subjective resemblance to the Earth convinced him that
I always
Lunarians
liked that
must
idea in
exist,
Pacific Rim, that
a
the
conviction
deep
still
ocean
being
is
upheld
just
more than a
fucking
century
aliens.
later by who else if not William Herschel. I hope and am convinced that sometime or other very evident signs of life will be discovered on the Moon. It didn't take long for these very evident signs to make themselves apparent. I am almost convinced that those numberless small circuses we see on the moon are the works of the Lunarians and may be called their towns. Herschel nearly convinced himself that the cratered landscape of the moon had been engineered by its inhabitants. Craters or circuses were not the remnants of violent impact events, but skillfully constructed towns and cities. While Herschel obsessed over circular dwellings, astronomers like Franz von Gröthesen espied habitats of all shapes and
I thought you were
sizes.
about to try and say it.
This
No, he said
star-like
it. It sounded
structure
awesome.
appears to be a
Franz von
kind of a
Gröthesen.
temple, and because of its star shape,
Fucking
perhaps
awesome.
it is dedicated in service to the stars. The circle in the south, the two highest mountains in the north, and the two hills in the southwest are natural objects, but it is highly probable that these embankments serve as the dwellings
Grease
of
of beauty.
sentient beings on the moon. In reality, Gröthesen mistook some oddly shaped terrain for intelligent design.
Oh.
The increasingly speculative nature of these extraordinary claims
Mistake that could
culminated
happen
in
to
a
anyone.
truly incredible sighting by John Herschel, the son of William Herschel. Whilst gazing upon a rock formation on the moon, we were thrilled with astonishment to perceive 4 successive flocks of large winged creatures. They were like human beings. Their wings possessed great expansion and were similar in structure to those of the bat.
So he just
The moon was
fucking
evidently home
he's just
to
lying.
species of
Now he's just
walking
lying.
and flying man-bats. This was a truly profound, if not bemusing, discovery, not just for the world, but also for John Herschel. Because upon being inquired about this remarkable find,
Those look like the
John
monkeys
responded
from
with
Mr. Bob.
confusion. He had no knowledge of any
Jesus Christ.
man-bats on the moon. It turns out the story had been fabricated by an American journalist named Richard Locke. Locke had sought to lampoon the often frivolous debate about life on other worlds, perpetuated by the likes of William Herschel and Franz von Gröthesen. Instead, the great moon hoax of 1835 convinced thousands around the world that the moon was inhabited by bat-like humanoids, unicorned bison, bipedal beavers, as well as, well, storks and
Yeah.
goats. There's also this image of a man-bat besat the flat upon the back of a fellow man-bat televacked by a pack of man-bats. As to why this guy is copying a whiff, history has declined to answer.
It's a pretty cool fucking picture, though. I wish those aliens were on the moon. Bro, if those aliens were on the moon, there'd
As
be
time
no
went on
doubt
and
people would be
telescopes
just
improved,
like
it became
killing them
increasingly difficult
relentlessly.
to argue in
Just
favor
because they
of the
don't
moon's
like the way they
habitability.
look.
With
Fucking
no
sniffing
apparent
buttholes and
atmosphere,
shit.
this dry and barren wasteland seemed an improbable abode for life as we know it. But by the mid-19th century, the life debate had been resurrected by a new hypothesis about the shape of the moon. The argument was that gravitational forces had stretched the moon into the shape of an egg. This uneven distribution of mass meant that any atmosphere or fluids would have coalesced on whichever side was closer to the center of gravity. If that happened to be the far side of the moon, an argument could be made for its habitability. As one author put it, though the near hemisphere is a lifeless desert, having neither water nor air to sustain life, the hidden hemisphere may have a teeming population. Among the proponents of this
And he
radical
was
hypothesis
right.
was none other than John Herschel. An egg shape would fully account for the total absence both of air and of water on the side of the moon turned towards us, and would be quite compatible with the abundant existence
You
of both
gain
and of a
immunity
habitable
from
hemisphere
shit by
on the
licking
opposite side.
ass.
Ew.
Had history played out differently, perhaps
don't
we'd be
think that's
dealing with
scientifically
egg
correct.
mooners
The
instead
more
of flat
ass you
earthers
lick,
at this
the
point.
less
No, but that's
hurt you
lunacy,
are
though.
by
While
shit, I
skeptics
guess.
made quick work of the egg-shaped moon hypothesis,
sense to me.
far-side inhabitants could not be
Jeez.
so easily dismissed. After all, the far side of the moon is unseeable from Earth, and thus ripe for
Said X
speculation.
dogs do it.
So then I subjected them to a spectrographic analysis. It's dust. A great amount of radioactive dust.
Larry, what you're saying is that somehow, for some reason, the moon has been encircled by a ring of highly radioactive dust?
Something's going on the other side of the moon, the invisible side.
This is reminding
Something
me of
that we
Moonfall.
ought to know about.
By placing aliens on the far side of the moon,
Neither have I.
early science fiction authors were able to
haven't
skirt the
seen Dark
line
Side
of
of the Moon.
plausibility.
Oh, you were talking about
Aliens wanted
Moonfall.
to conceal
Oh,
their presence
yeah.
and perhaps observe humanity from a distance, This
These are the
cosmic
bits.
blind spot was the perfect
Joe.
hiding place. At least that was the opinion of famed American astronomer Carl Sagan.
Hey!
It is not out of the question that artifacts or even some kind of base is maintained within the solar system.
Did he really say
For a
that?
base.
That doesn't sound
Humanity's
like...
detection, it might have appeared preferable not to erect such a base on Earth. The Moon seems one reasonable alternative site for a base. Humanity got its
Anything you would
first
ever
glimpse
believe.
of the far side of the Moon in late 1959,
base?
when the Soviet spacecraft Luna 3 relayed these images back to mission control. Subsequent
Moon
missions
is just
improved
hiding
upon
her
the quality,
pussy on the other side.
but alas, revealed nothing but more Moon. But this idea of concealment lingers to this day. Many are still holding out hope that somewhere in the solar system, the ruins or technology of some unknown intelligence lie waiting to be found.
God, I hope that's accurate.
In 1988, the Soviet Union launched a probe known as Phobos II. As the name implies, part of its mission was to investigate the Martian moon, Phobos. The probe arrived at Phobos without any major complications, and in late March of 1989 began preparations to plant 2 instruments onto its surface. But then, contact with Phobos II was lost. In the weeks and months that followed, rumors began to circulate. Puzzling features and shadows were said to be visible on some of the final images transmitted by Phobos II, the nature and origin of which supposedly defied explanation. Through various articles, conferences, and television programs, these images were gradually unveiled to the public. They appear to depict an unidentified craft in orbit around Mars. It was said to be an
Looks
alien
like a
spaceship
little
that had
stain.
attacked and disabled Phobos II. Not only that, but it cast an enormous elliptical shadow upon the surface of Mars.
Okay, that's interesting.
The Eye of Sauron, eh?
Но эта тень появилась действительно неожиданно, и что это такое, мы сразу не поняли. И, наверное, не очень хорошо обратили на это внимание, потому что дальше она опять, увидите, продолжается в виде полосы такой.
То есть это не предмет, висящий над поверхностью, а это, видимо, тень все-таки на поверхности планеты?
Наверное. Потому что, то есть это не полностью перекрывается, так сказать, сигнал от поверхности Марса.
Это похоже на ракету, взлетающую из поверхности Марса, и после которой еще остается инверсионный след. Как вы к этому относитесь?
Но если дать волю фантазии, то, конечно, можно найти и такие объяснения. Но мы склонны видеть совершенно реальные, хотя, может быть, еще до конца не объясненные обстоятельства, которые породили вот такой вот след. Скорее всего, это все-таки тень от какого-то объекта на поверхности, потому что сквозь тень просвечиваются элементы поверхности.
The mystery persisted for about a decade or two until the raw data from the Phobos II mission became readily accessible. The unidentified craft looked an awful lot like an overexposed transmission artifact.
Oh.
In fact, all the infrared images featured the same white streak.
Yep. God damn it.
Meanwhile, the elliptical shadow belonged to Phobos. Its elongated shape was due to multiple scans or photographs being taken in sequence before assembling the final image. Stories like the Phobos incident have become rather par for the course. Some initial event or discovery leaves an information vacuum which is immediately filled by fantastical speculation.
Yeah,
A
the
printing
speculation
artifact
is
becomes
always
a tower on the
fantastic.
moon. The happenstance of light and shadow begets a human face on
It's
Mars.
fucking cool.
And these prominent boulders
Sequel,
on both
Panda.
Mars and Phobos conjure images of a certain Stanley Kubrick film. More recently, a Chinese rover on the moon captured this image of what some described as a hut. Upon closer inspection, everyone was absolutely gobsmacked when the hut was exposed as a rock. Whether you are
Wait, what
an
if they're just
amateur or
really short
professional,
aliens?
have no experience or decades worth, you're never quite immune to this kind of
They just live in the
self-deception.
rocks.
When you
People
want
probably
something
need
to be
to be able
true,
to
it
show
can
your
be
live on the
deceptively
moon because
easy
secret, like,
to
not
convince
as much
yourself
gravity,
that it
you
is.
know?
Yeah.
Remember that prize money, the
Yeah.
100,000 francs
That's science
offered to
somewhere
anyone
in
who
there.
discovered a means of
Yeah.
communicating with another planet, excluding Mars. Well, in 1937, there was a claim on that prize. The claimant was none other than world-renowned inventor Nikola Tesla.
He died a virgin.
In 1899,
fucking died
Tesla
a
had been
virgin, what an
experimenting
idiot.
with wireless radio communication.
Stupid fucking virgin.
During some of those experiments, he picked up some rather odd transmissions. Although I could not decipher
Exhibits,
their
Coco.
meaning, the
Sleep well.
feeling is constantly growing in me that I have been the first to hear the greeting of one planet to another. A purpose was behind these electrical signals. Tesla described the signals as a repeating sequence of either 3 or 4 pulses. Decades later, Tesla was still convinced that he'd received an interplanetary message and had even deduced its origin. The signals consisted in a regular repetition of numbers, and subsequent study convinced me that they must have emanated from Mars. I believe the Martians used numbers for communication because numbers are universal. Then, in 1937, Tesla announced his plans to unveil a new technology capable of not just interplanetary, but interstellar communication. With such impressive technology at hand, Tesla felt confident that he'd soon be awarded the 100,000 francs. I intend to claim the Pierre Gussman Prize. I am just as sure the prize will be awarded to me as if I already had it in my pocket. They have got to do it. They didn't do it. The prize was instead awarded to the crew of Apollo 11 in 1969. As for the alleged message from Mars, well, we don't really know. While Earth was much quieter back in 1899, it was still far from radio silent.
Wow, that's a cool noise. Shit. Oh, one sucks. It just sounds like wind. Jupiter's cringe. Get off the air. Hate this radio station. Just sounds like footsteps. Boo!
Footsteps. They're coming closer to us.
Yeah, boo.
Who knows?
Fuck 'em.
Perhaps it was nothing but the rumbling noise of a distant thunderstorm. Upon sailing into the shadow of Venus in 1975, Venera 9 detected faint flashes of light. The emissions were broadly consistent with lightning, but it's a matter of interpretation. Data gathered by subsequent missions are likewise consistent with Venusian thunderstorms, yet fall short of any conclusive evidence. Presuming that lightning does occur on Venus, could it explain the Ashen Light?
I don't think it
well,
could.
It's been
the
estimated
only
that
explanation
the
for
night
the
side of
Ashen
Venus
Light
would
is
need
a
to maintain a
highly
rate of
advanced
some 1,000 lightning
civilization
strikes
of
per
aliens.
second to yield a glow
Perhaps
that's
even using
visible
Mass
from
Effect
Earth.
relays to
That's more
travel.
than 20 times the mean rate on Earth, and would likely have been observed a
I
long
think
time
Yugen
ago.
was correct
In the blunt words
initially.
of another paper, lightning is not
Or
acceptable
was
as
it
an
Herschel? I don't
explanation
remember.
for the Ashen Light. But in certain parts of the world, there is another striking phenomenon illuminating the night sky.
Aurora
These
Borealis.
vibrant curtains of light are the result of charged particles ejected by the sun
No, but it is
colliding with the
cool.
Earth's magnetic field. Could something akin to
These
the
are some
Northern
starlight.
Lights be responsible for the Ashen Light?
Been scanned.
Aurorae have
Yeah.
indeed been observed on
It's also
planets like
encouraged
Jupiter
cowardly
and
dogs, so-
Saturn, so
Okay, so maybe
it might
it's
seem like
Yep.
an obvious solution. What makes it not so obvious is that the magnetic field around Venus is virtually non-existent. It is extremely weak and transient and is generated by a completely different process than here on Earth. In spite of this, when caught in the
recent
path of
Kathy.
a solar storm, Venus has in recent years been observed to glow.
That's fucking awesome.
The underlying mechanism of this glow is still poorly understood, but there is an apparent link between solar activity and diffused emissions of light on the night side of Venus. Not only that, but there is a weak correlation between solar activity and Ashen Light observations. According to author John Barentine, who's written the definitive book on the subject, the data are inconclusive, but there are hints in this figure that something is indeed up. The apparent spike in the number of Ashen Light sightings in the 1950s correlates with one of the strongest solar maxima of the past 250 years.
Okay, so we're getting somewhere. As
While all of
Wi-Fi
this
signals
sounds quite
increase, so
promising,
too does
it's a bit
the
too
maxima.
early to celebrate. Nothing conclusive
I
has
think
been
is what
found,
he's
and
saying.
despite many attempts to do so, the Ashen Light has never been recorded on camera. Until that happens, this maybe 400-year-old mystery remains in limbo. Should it be ascribed to the atmosphere of Venus,
or the mind of the observer. Perhaps we should have listened to Giovanni Riccioli from the very beginning. Perhaps it is nothing more than a convincing illusion.
Yeah, I think it's an illusion. I don't believe in anything. Ever.
At all.
The search for cosmic neighbors continues. Many scientists now believe that both Venus and Mars used to resemble Earth in the distant past. Perhaps a relict biosphere or the remnants of a once teeming population can still be found in Venusian clouds or Martian soil. There's mounting evidence that the Jovian moons Europa, Ganymede and Callisto, along with Enceladus and Titan of Saturn, all host a vast subglacial ocean. Could resilient microbes or even larger organisms have found a way to thrive beneath the frozen crust? Who knows, an apparent hut on the moon or a monolith on Mars might one day match our most outlandish expectations. Even if Earth should prove the sole harbor of life within the solar system, every dot in the night sky has the potential to host another. And with the launch of the James Webb Telescope, there's no telling what secrets are about to be unveiled. Always remember that if at first you don't understand, it's definitely aliens.
LEMMiNO. Yeah, he always does really well done videos. He spends months on them. Yeah, no, he spends a lot of time on them. You need special proteins like frogs have that don't allow ice crystals to form quickly. Those are the ones that fuck you up. Yeah, they like burst all your cells or something, right?
That's interesting. So maybe witches were on something. Frog stews and everything.
Maybe. All I know is we're not there yet. Maybe we could find a different way of preserving, like formaldehyde. Just like dumping people in formaldehyde chambers. And they wake up all gooey and yucky but alive. Can we pickle humans? See, someone gets it. I bet with enough dedication and resources we could find a way to like actually pickle humans. Make sure to smash that like button and thumbs up, ring the bell, tell your mom I said hi. Yeah, that's about it. See ya.